Welcome to the Emotional Eating Unwrapped podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, an emotional eating and weight loss coach for women looking to fall in love with eating, create healthy attachments with food, and lose weight sustainably. Hello, and welcome to our first episode. Well, the first episode I'm recording in 2025. Welcome to Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm so happy to be here. I can't believe this is the third year that we're doing this podcast. I started the podcast in 2023, did an episode almost every week in 2024, and now we are in 2025. So everyone who's been following along on the podcast for the last, year and change, I'm so grateful for you. I'm so happy that this podcast is serving you. And this episode is not going to disappoint because I am going to be chatting with you today about stress, sleep, and snacking, and how your exhaustion or how being exhausted fuels emotional eating. And I know that especially this time of year after the holidays, in the winter time where there's not as much sun as we usually have, especially on this side of the world. If you're listening in New Zealand or Australia, I know that we have listeners there. I have people from that side of the world in my programs as well. I know that it's summer for you, so it might not be the same. But when we have less vitamin D, when we have less sun, exhaustion is definitely more prevalent. And there is a connection between stress, sleep, snacking, and feeling tired, and even that urge to eat, right? And this is something that is actually a real thing. So if you in your own life sense that this type of relationship with food becomes a little bit more heightened this time of year, it is not in your head. And that is what I want to validate to you today, because I know for myself, this hits home for me. And so if you found yourself in a cycle of, using food for comfort right now, feeling a little bit more of that urge, and just, your brain is thinking about food or thinking about eating or thinking about sweets a little bit more, it is a biological thing that we're going to go into. And it has nothing to do with your lack of willpower or the fact that you need to be better, do better. There's actually a lot going on in your body that's driving these cravings. And it starts with prioritizing, minimizing stress, and making sleep something that you put effort into having more of, and not just being in bed, but actually having good quality sleep. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit what's going on behind the scenes when you are sleep deprived or when you are feeling stress. Because like I said, it's not just in your head. There's a real biological reason why you are reaching for these salty, sweet, crunchy foods, after a long day or in the middle of a day, right? Where, you feel like you might need a pick-me-up, or you have brain fog, right? And you feel like you might need to get a snack. So let's go into it. So when you don't get enough sleep, and if this is you, if you fall into the bucket of not getting enough sleep, and not getting enough sleep is, different for everybody, but I would say that it's pretty standard that as adults, we need 6.5 hours minimum sleep. And that's 6.5 hours of good, restful sleep. Okay, because what happens is when we don't have enough sleep, especially when we don't have enough sleep over a continuous period of time, even to the point where we might still be able to function. And so here's the catch-22, is that you might be saying, oh, I get 5 hours of sleep and I can be productive and I can function well, and I don't feel that feeling of I'm going to fall asleep in my chair. Maybe you don't feel that way, but internally your body does. And the way that your body reacts and the way that your body processes that is your hunger hormones will go out of whack. So I'm not going to go too deep into the, nitpicky science, but there's two really important hormones. One hormone is ghrelin, which is the hormone that tells you you're hungry. And when you're sleep deprived, that hormone ramps up. And the other hormone, leptin, which is the hormone that signals fullness, that hormone is not being produced as efficiently, as effectively, or as readily as it needs to be when we are sleep deprived. So what happens then is that your body feels like it's hungry. It needs more food. So if you're sitting here being like, I feel hungry, my advice to you in this instance is to really look at your sleep here. And then there's cortisol, which is your body's stress hormone. And if you haven't listened to that episode on cortisol yet, last year I recorded a whole episode on cortisol. I'll be recording, more episodes this year on hormones as well. But go back and listen to that, because cortisol is your body's stress hormone. Okay, there's your body's day-to-day stress hormone, whereas adrenaline or epinephrine is your body's like trauma response stress hormone. Cortisol is your body's day-to-day. And when you're not sleeping well, when your sleep is not efficient or effective, your cortisol levels spike. And this tells your brain that we are in survival mode, right? So when your cortisol levels spike, your brain is going to get a signal that you need quick energy. And what is the first thing that our brains go to? Because this is a primitive response. The first thing that we go to is food. And the first thing we go to is food that gives us energy quickly. And what gives us energy quickly? What molecular compounds break down into energy quickly? It is sugar compounds, right? Specifically, simple sugars. So, high sugar food, candy, right? Things that don't need so much energy to break down, right? So protein takes energy to break down. It takes a little bit longer. It doesn't give us quick energy. In fact, protein is a muscle builder. It's much more of a builder in the body, right? So what gives us energy is carbohydrates, right? And this is a whole other conversation, but it's why this is important for us to eat carbohydrates in our diet on a regular basis. But what gives us that quick energy is simple sugars, which comes from ice cream, which come from potatoes like fries, right? And then adding to that is that mouthfeel that we like, right? That's comforting. So when we're sleep deprived, there's also a part of us that is more apt to be seduced by wanting to feel comforted and relaxed, because there's this edginess that we have subconsciously. And so we end up getting more, seduced, or, reaching more for those foods like greasy, oily, high fat foods like fries or ice cream or something like that. So, and this is something that we often will then say to ourselves, oh my God, I have bad willpower, or we blame it on ourselves. And the thing is like, it's not really you. It is you because it's your biology, but it's not something wrong with you. And it's something that used to be something that I used to do all the time, especially before I brought that habit or that dynamic into my conscious awareness, which is really, really important to do in order to change a behavior that feels like it's our default setting. So for me, I would come home from work or I would come home after a long day, and I would immediately, again, when I was not so conscious to this biological connection between exhaustion and, hunger and hunger hormones and all this stuff, I would eat whatever was easiest. And as an emotional eater, or as somebody that also struggled with body image and things like that, that often was a very slippery slope towards a binge, or towards feeling bad about myself, or towards getting into an obsessive cycle loop about food and about my weight and all that stuff, because like that one unconscious moment that was stemming from something that was biological would lead to a night or even a couple of days of feeling, of emotional eating or just feeling low self-worth, low self-esteem. So this is why awareness and understanding of this stuff is so important, because it gives us that motivation and that self-compassion to heal, right? When we realize it's not our fault, it makes it easier to feel motivated to overcome. Okay, and that's what I want you to understand here. But to take it further when it comes to the weight, right? Because sometimes if you fall into the bucket of, well, I also feel like I can't let go of weight, it's because, even if you are, right? So let's say that you then become more conscious of what you're eating. You then become more conscious of making more aligned decisions in the moment. And you still find that potentially the weight's not being released in your body. And the reason that could happen is because your cortisol levels are still high. So even if you do adapt your behaviors with food, but you're still not getting good sleep and you're still running on exhaustion, you might find that you're still having trouble losing weight. And you might be like, why is this happening? I'm changing my eating habits. I'm changing my behaviors with food. I'm not reaching for the snacks. I'm trying so hard to be better with my eating choices, but I'm still not losing weight. And the reason is because when you have a lack of sleep, when you're exhausted, when your body is triggering cortisol on a level that's too much, right? It's overusing the cortisol, right? It's overproducing cortisol. What's going to happen is your body's going to hold on to more fat cells, because your body is going to get a signal that you're in stress. And one of the protective mechanisms and one of the ways that we have evolved as humans to survive is our fat cells. Our fat cells are protection. They are a form of protection in many ways. They're a form of protection as far as cushioning, but they're also as cushioning for our organs, right? But they're also a form of protection because fat cells secrete certain hormones for survival. The problem is when we don't need those hormones and we have the fat cells, they're kind of self-regenerating, which is why healing your hormones helps with releasing fat and releasing weight. Okay, so, and sleep is probably like the most, that and having a well-balanced composition of nutrients. Those two things together are what impact your hormones the most, right? Sleep, well-balanced nutrients, right? For the most part, like 80-20, I'd say. And, energy hygiene, which I talk about a lot as well. So, making sure you have good energetic boundaries, your relationships are good, the environment that you put yourself in is not triggering your nervous system, right? So all these things are really important, but sleep is huge. You can heal so much with good sleep, okay? Good sleep also helps with decision making. Okay, like think about when you're running on empty. It's like brain fog is more prevalent. It's really hard to make mindful choices because the prefrontal cortex doesn't work as well when you are sleep deprived. That's a fact. I remember what it felt like to be stuck in the cycle of emotional eating. I tried every diet out there, counting, tracking, restricting, but nothing ever worked. Food controlled my life, my thoughts, and I constantly felt guilty after eating. But once I learned how to heal the emotional triggers behind my eating and trust my body, everything changed. I stopped obsessing over food, the weight started coming off naturally, and I found real freedom in how I ate and lived. So I created the Sober Eating year-long mentorship to help other women experience the same transformation. So you can stop battling with food, you can lose weight without deprivation, and you can feel confident in your body again. In this mentorship, you'll have access to my proven nervous system rewiring method. You'll have access to live coaching with me, weekly accountability, and a community of women who truly understand your journey. You'll also have free access to my signature programs, the Emotional Eating Solution and Decoding Permanent Weight Loss, valued at $2,000. Click the link in the show notes to explore the mentorship today. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right there with you every step of the way. The prefrontal cortex of the brain is what is in charge of making decisions that are aligned with our highest value. They're in charge. The prefrontal cortex is in charge of executive function. That's essentially what it is. And it's why it doesn't develop till we're 25 years old. And it's why we sometimes make questionable decisions before that. However, it does become compromised with a lack of sleep as well. It's why we could find ourselves feeling like we don't know why we made this decision, or we don't feel in control, because we are not in control when our executive function is compromised because of a lack of sleep. Okay, I remember, this is just one example, but I think I was waking up super early to be teaching yoga. I think I was teaching yoga starting at 6 a.m. And I was like in my mid to late 20s, and I was going to sleep at like 11:30, but I was waking up at like 5:15. And on the outside, I was fine. Like I woke up, I wasn't exhausted. I didn't have that exhausted feeling. I was able to be efficient, function, teach, I felt good. But when I think back, that was a time when I was still struggling, with my weight and with my, with like I had healed my, abusive relationship with food for the most part, but I was struggling with dropping weight. And I was struggling sometimes with my hunger cues and like being able to really stop eating when I was satisfied. And I wasn't like, it wasn't a problem, but it was like there was still this maybe like these pounds and the way that I wanted my body to look, it wasn't quite happening. And when I think about it now, or, I've thought about it before, but now when I'm talking about it now, it was because of my sleep, right? My body, my biology wasn't allowing me to release the weight. It's when I stopped teaching yoga that early in the morning and I started getting a little bit more sleep, just like another hour and a half. That and, other choices that I made in my life as well, the weight came off. That's when I say like around, so my birthday is actually tomorrow. I'll be 44 years old. And today is January 7th. I'm recording this. My birthday is on the 8th. And this was about like 28, when I was 28 years old that I realized this. And by the time I was 30, that's when I really kind of dropped all the weight that I ever was holding on to, that 40 pounds. The sleep made a massive, massive, massive difference for me. Okay, huge difference for me. So how do we break this cycle? Okay, how do we break the cycle of being exhausted, having too little sleep, maybe reaching for snacks, triggering our cortisol level, compromising our hunger cues? How do we break this cycle so that we can reconnect with our body? And the amazing thing about the body is that once you get it into alignment, it really it wants to release the weight. It doesn't, like, it wants to be its best. And so once we set it up to win, the weight usually comes off. The harder part is these habitual, behaviors that we've made with food and these emotional attachments that we've created with food that we have to kind of reprogram our brains and our nervous systems around. But the weight part is usually the easier part. Okay, so let's talk about sleep. So, we've heard those cliche things before, do a sleep routine, make up some sort of routine, write in a journal, gratitude. Okay. Like I'm all for having these organized programs, but let's be real, none of us do it. Right. So let's just I'm not a big fan of, finding some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps and then good sleep. Like I just don't think that that's a long-term sustainable solution. What I think is a good sustainable solution is to look at your lifestyle and to make some intentional changes. Okay. So one thing you could do is have energetic boundaries for yourself after a certain time of day. So that means for me, what that means is not getting into intense conversations, after a certain time of day, not going to engage in, anything that's going to activate my nervous system through receiving energy from the outside, right? So if I get a phone call after a certain time, I don't care who it is, I'm not answering the phone, right? Unless it's my husband and we've agreed, right? We've agreed. So my nervous system knows that I'm on alert for that call and it's a different situation. But anyone else, I'm not answering that, right? I get a text message or a notification or DM or something like that after a certain time, not happening, not answering it, right? Like anything that's going to pull me out of any kind of nervous system regulation, I'm not doing after a certain time of day. And that's an energetic boundary that, you have to practice in your life to do. You have to deal with the discomfort of the reactions, the responses, the internal judgments that you're going to have around yourself for doing that in order to make this successful. But that's one of the most successful things that I have done for myself that has really, really preserved my peace and preserved my sleep. It is not rude to put yourself first like that. In fact, it is really, really necessary. I've had clients, I've seen people who've done just about everything else, right? They've changed their relationship with food. They've started, doing really good things with food, but they're not able to put up energetic boundaries with people and they just can't hit their goals. This is a huge one, right? It's not always about the food. That's something to remember. All right. This is one that is, I think, this is one that a lot of people talk about, screen time, cutting back on screen time before bed. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is the energetic boundaries that we've talked about before, but the blue light messes with, the retina, messes with the brain and the eyes before sleep also. Some people will say that it makes them tired, but I'll tell you right now that there's a difference between falling asleep and efficient sleep. And maybe the screen helps your eyes get tired so you fall asleep, but oftentimes you're not getting the best sleep. And so if you have that happening where you're like, oh, I'm falling asleep easily, but then you still find yourself with these, brain fog, difficulty, stopping yourself from reaching for these sugary or salty snacks, you're having difficulty with weight loss, you feel edgy, but you feel like you're getting out you're getting maybe 6.5+ hours of sleep, ask yourself about the screen time and see if your sleep is actually effective and efficient. Okay. So, what can you do instead of screen time? You can read a book. So I've started reading books because I'm in a book club now and it's really, really great. And the books really help because it kind of gives you that eyes get tired feeling without the blue light. So I love that, right? Also, you'd be surprised what happens when you just let yourself close your eyes and breathe. I know it's like counting sheep is like that cliche thing, but I don't know. The other night I did it where I just kind of let myself breathe and relax and just intentionally just relaxed and it worked. So I don't know, teach their own. And then another thing that you want to do, and this is more food related, is because the reality is that emotional eating in these moments are probably going to happen regardless. Because like I always say, healing from emotional eating is never not emotional eating. It's really just having the awareness of the fact that, healing from emotional eating is when you're able to recognize that food is something that you turn to as a coping mechanism, but there's this space between that recognition and actually using food and abusing food to numb, to distract. And if you can make a conscious decision about that, then you're actually healed, right? So, right? Like healing from emotional eating is not all of a sudden never emotional eating. When we're struggling with emotional eating, it's because it's unconscious and we feel out of control. But having control is healing. So that being said, having safe snacks in your house for those moments when maybe you do reach for food when you get home is massive, right? So it can be like a handful of something, a piece of fruit, popcorn. I know for me, definitely over the last 2 weeks over this holiday break and a little bit after New Year's when we had a huge snowstorm here and I felt stir crazy and my routine was off, I definitely was coming up against a lot of that emotional eating energy. And I definitely ate when I wasn't hungry, but I had my safe snacks around, like apples and, little single servings of this and that I've created and cultivated over the year, that I know that when I eat those things, it's not going to trigger me to feel guilt, right? Maybe I know consciously that I didn't need to eat it, but like I said, it's not healing from emotional eating is not never emotionally eating. Okay. We don't have to be perfect with this, right? We just don't want to get into a situation where we're, treating ourselves terribly, putting ourselves into a situation where we feel like where we feel disempowered. We don't want to feel disempowered, right? We want to feel empowered. And even if that empowered feeling is wrapped up in maybe choosing to eat when you're not that hungry, but you've done it with a safe choice, then great. That's a win. All right. And then the last thing, or one of the last things that I'm going to share as a breaking the cycle is proactive rest. So what is proactive rest? So proactive rest is just intentionally creating moments in your day where you just let yourself relax, right? So like small moments of calm. So that can be like, just pausing, taking a walk around your house, sitting on a couch and taking a couple breaths, having a cup of tea, right? It's more just like intentional nervous system resets, right? Just intentionally just closing your eyes, maybe set a timer for 5 minutes. And then lastly, it's reconnecting with your body's natural hunger and fullness cues, right? Like you want to ask yourself, am I still hungry? How do I feel in my body right now? You want to be able to be present with yourself while you're eating so that you can always be the one in the driver's seat and always be the one in power with yourself and your eating habits. Okay? So here's the truth, okay? You can't create lasting change without a solid foundation. Sleep and stress play a massive, massive role in how we show up and even how our bodies carry weight. And sometimes you might not even feel the stress physically. We live in a society right now where it's almost like we've gotten so used to stress being a default setting that we have to be face plant down on the floor to say that we're stressed. But the thing is our bodies don't need to go that far for the stress response to turn on. And that's what's so important to remember, is that once we actually feel the weight, no pun intended, of our stress, it's almost like it's too far, right? It's not too far, it's not too far because you can always bring it back, but it's like, it's worth. So when you start setting boundaries around your basic needs, around being able to have a lower stress lifestyle, when you prioritize rest, when you prioritize your energetic boundaries, when you prioritize your presence with your eating, when you prioritize creating a safe environment with food around so that if and when you find yourself in a position that's compromised emotionally, energetically, biologically, you put yourself in a position to win anyway. You're not just taking care of your body, you're setting the stage for everything else to fall into place. Everything else will fall into place once you do these things. And you don't have to do it perfectly, but you do have to keep your attention and attunement on doing these things so that they become more second nature. All right. That is all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, please subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, thank you so much. Please subscribe on YouTube. And once again, I so appreciate you for listening. I so appreciate you for contributing to this community. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much. I am Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped. See you soon.